In the heart of the Wild West, one mysterious box changed a lonely rancher's life forever. Secrets of the past returned with a stranger's arrival, and nothing would ever be the same again. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. The sun burned low across the vast Wyoming plains, turning the golden fields into waves of fire. Eli Carter, a tall, weathered rancher in his late 30s, leaned against the wooden fence outside his barn, the smell of dust and leather thick in the air. He had worked the same land for years, sunrise to sunset, never asking for much beyond peace. But peace had never lasted long in the West. As he gazed toward the horizon, the faint echo of hooves broke the stillness, a single rider cutting through the evening light. Eli straightened, his instincts on edge. Strangers rarely came this far out unless trouble rode with them. The rider came fast, a blur of motion in the fading sun. When the horse finally slowed, Eli saw the rider was a woman, her hat tilted low, her coat heavy with trail dust. She dismounted swiftly, boots crunching against the dry earth, and for a long second, they just stared at each other. There was something in her eyes, not fear, not fatigue, but purpose. Without a word, she tossed a small wooden box at his feet, its metal hinges clinking sharply. Her voice was low but firm, carrying authority that made Eli tense. "You're Eli Carter?" she asked. He narrowed his gaze. "Depends who's asking." The woman folded her arms and replied, "Then open it up." "Now." Eli crouched slowly, picking up the box. It was old, heavy, and carved with a symbol he hadn't seen in a decade, a brand burned deep into the wood, shaped like a coiled serpent. His chest tightened. The mark belonged to the Black Mesa Gang, the outlaw group he once rode with before he'd turned his back on that life. Every part of him wanted to throw the box away, to pretend it didn't exist. But curiosity, and something darker, made him slice the rusted latch open with his knife. The lid creaked, revealing 3 objects, a folded letter, a silver locket, and a tarnished sheriff's badge. The sight hit him like a bullet. It was his brother's badge, Samuel Carter, the lawman who'd vanished 10 years ago in a fire that consumed half the old mining town. The woman's voice trembled for the first time. "He wasn't killed in that fire," she said, watching his reaction. Eli looked up sharply, his jaw tightening. "What did you say?" She took a step closer, her tone steady now. "He was betrayed, Eli. Someone inside the gang set him up." The words cracked the silence like thunder. Eli's hand gripped the letter. It was indeed his brother's handwriting, old but unmistakable. The words inside told of deceit, ambush, and the warning he'd never delivered. Then came the final line, "If I don't make it, find Annie." Eli's heart raced as he turned toward the stranger. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman slowly removed her hat. The light caught her face, revealing sharp yet familiar features. The same piercing blue eyes Samuel once had. Her voice softened as she spoke. "My name's Annie Carter. Your brother was my father." Eli felt the air drain from his chest, the world around him spinning for a moment. The dry wind swept through the grass, carrying ghosts of the past with it. He'd buried his brother's memory years ago, buried his guilt even deeper. But now, standing before him was blood, family, and with her, the truth he'd been too afraid to uncover. Annie held his gaze and said quietly, "I came here to finish what he started." Eli looked down at the badge, its metal glinting faintly under the last rays of sunlight. His mind flooded with memories, gunfire, smoke, the screams of that burning night. He clenched the badge in his hand and looked at Annie with a mix of pain and pride. "Then you came to the right place," he said finally. The prairie wind howled across the open land, and for the first time in 10 years, Eli Carter felt the old fire in his blood return. The past was no longer buried. It had just ridden back into his life, and this time he wasn't running. The next morning dawned gray over the Carter Ranch, with the sky heavy and still as if the land itself held its breath. Eli saddled his horse, his mind restless after a sleepless night. Annie sat by the porch cleaning her father's old revolver, the same weapon Samuel Carter carried when he wore the sheriff's badge. The ranch was quiet, save for the creak of leather and the sound of steel snapping into place. Eli looked at her and said, "If you're staying, you'd best know what's coming. Ryder Kane won't rest easy once he knows I'm alive and you're asking questions." Annie met his gaze calm and steady. "I didn't ride all this way to rest easy," she said. "I came for justice." Her voice had the same stubborn edge her father once carried, the same unbreakable will. Eli saw it and knew the fight ahead wasn't just his anymore. By noon, the two of them were on the trail to Cheyenne. Dust trailed behind their horses as they cut through the open plains, the wind biting at their coats. The land stretched endless and wild, dotted with ghosts of broken towns and old outlaw graves. For hours, neither spoke. But as they neared the city, Annie finally asked, "Did you ever try to find out who betrayed him?" Eli's jaw tightened. "I did once," he said quietly. "But every lead led to Ryder. Back then, he had lawmen on his side, money in his pocket, and enough fear in the territory to keep folks quiet." Annie nodded slowly. "Then it's time someone made him answer." There was a spark in her tone. Not just vengeance, but justice. And Eli felt it too. The same fire his brother once carried was alive again, riding beside him. By evening, they reached Cheyenne. The streets were loud with wagons and music, the smell of whiskey thick in the air. They tied their horses outside the Copper Star Saloon, where Ryder Kane was known to hold court like a king. Inside, smoke curled through the lantern light. Ryder stood by the piano, older now, his once handsome face hardened by greed. The room quieted when Eli stepped through the swinging doors, dust-covered and silent. Ryder turned, his eyes narrowing. "Well, I'll be damned," he said with a laugh. "Eli Carter, the ghost of the Black Mesa rides again." Eli walked forward, dropping the silver locket onto the bar. It spun once before resting still. "That belonged to Samuel Carter," he said evenly. "You remember him, don't you?" Ryder smirked. "He should have stayed out of my way." Eli's voice dropped low. "You burned him alive. Now it's your turn to face what's coming." In a blur, both men went for their guns. The room exploded with motion, chairs scraping, glass shattering. But Eli was faster. One clean shot rang out, echoing off the saloon walls. Ryder staggered back, eyes wide, and fell, his gun slipping from his hand. Silence swallowed the room. Annie stood frozen in the doorway, her father's revolver still at her side, but her eyes soft with tears. Eli holstered his weapon and looked around the room. "Justice," he said simply, and walked out into the night. Weeks later, the Carter Ranch was no longer quiet with sorrow, but alive with laughter. Annie had found a friend in Luke Dawson, a young deputy who helped her and Eli bring the last of the Black Mesa gang to justice. On a bright spring morning, the ranch gathered under the wide-open sky as Annie and Luke said their vows. Lanterns swung in the wind, music played, and Eli stood beside them, his weathered face lit with pride. When the preacher ended the ceremony, Eli smiled faintly and whispered, "Guess I opened that box after all, and found myself a family." The crowd cheered, the music rose, and the ranch that once knew only ghosts now carried the sound of life again. The West had finally given something back. Not gold, not land, but peace.